There is a version of you that life is already planning to dismantle. It might happen through loss, through failure, through a diagnosis, through a betrayal you didn't see coming, through the slow erosion of years passing without anything ever quite changing. Life does not ask permission before it does this. It simply arrives at a time of its own choosing and takes apart whatever version of yourself you were clinging to, whether you were ready or not. The Stoics discovered something remarkable in response to this uncomfortable fact, something almost nobody wants to hear at first, but that changes everything once genuinely understood. You can do this work yourself, on your own terms, before life forces it on you against your will. And the version of you that emerges from choosing this destruction deliberately is almost always stronger than the version life would have left behind after doing it to you. Today, we are going to walk through exactly how the Stoics approached this kind of deliberate self-destruction and reinvention, not as a metaphor, but as an actual practiced philosophical discipline. Stay with me until the end, because the final principle in this video addresses something almost nobody talks about. What actually remains of you once the old version has genuinely been let go. Welcome back to Accent's Stoic, the channel where ancient philosophy meets the battles of modern life. If you're new here, welcome. You've arrived at exactly the right moment. And if you've been here before, you already know what we do. We go into the meditations of Marcus Aurelius, the letters of Seneca, and the discourses of Epictetus, and we pull out what has survived 2,000 years because it actually works. If this is the kind of depth you're here for, hit subscribe now, because today's video goes as deep as anything we've made. The foundational principle: you are already changing, whether you choose to or not. Before we get into the specific practices, we need to correct a comfortable illusion that quietly prevents most people from ever undertaking genuine reinvention. Marcus Aurelius, drawing on the earlier Greek philosopher Epictetus, wrote extensively about the constant, unstoppable flux underlying all existence. Nothing remains fixed. The body you have today is not the body you had a decade ago. The beliefs you hold have already shifted more times than you probably remember. The person you were at 20 is, in most meaningful respects, already gone, replaced gradually by whoever you've become since. Change is not something you opt into. It is the actual condition of being alive, happening constantly, with or without your conscious participation. Here is why this matters enormously for the idea of reinvention. Most people treat the decision to change as optional, something to consider someday when circumstances finally feel right. The Stoics would tell you this framing is simply false. You are already changing continuously, whether you direct that change deliberately or not. The only real choice available to you is whether this ongoing transformation happens with intention, guided by values you've actually examined and chosen, or whether it happens to you passively, shaped entirely by circumstance, habit, and whatever pressures happen to apply themselves without your active participation. Destroying the old version of yourself in the Stoic sense is not introducing something unnatural into a stable system. It is simply taking conscious ownership of a process that was always going to happen regardless. Consider the specific evidence for this claim in your own life, rather than treating it as an abstract philosophical position. The person you were 5 years ago held beliefs you no longer hold, prioritized things you no longer prioritize, and would likely be somewhat surprised by several of the choices you've made since. This transformation happened in large part without a single dramatic decision point you can point to. It accumulated gradually through thousands of small experiences, conversations, and adjustments, most of which you were not consciously directing at the time. The Stoic argument is not that you should now begin controlling something that was previously static. It is that you should begin consciously directing a process that has been running the entire time, mostly unattended, and that has been shaping you regardless of whether you were paying attention to it. Principle 1. Kill the version of you that needs approval. The first and often most difficult death required for genuine reinvention is the death of the self that organizes its choices around what other people will think. Epictetus taught that our true self is our capacity for judgment and character, entirely separate from external opinion. Yet most people, without fully realizing it, have built significant portions of their identity around managing how they appear to others. The careful curation of image, the reluctance to pursue something genuinely new because of how it might look, the quiet abandonment of ambitions that don't fit the story other people already have about who you are. This version of the self is exhausting to maintain precisely because it depends entirely on forces outside your control, and it is almost always the first thing that has to be deliberately dismantled before genuine reinvention becomes possible. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the specific danger of living for the good opinion of others rather than for your own settled sense of what is genuinely worthwhile. He observed that a person entirely dependent on external approval never actually belongs to themselves. They belong, in a very real sense, to whoever's opinion they've organized their choices around pleasing. Killing this version of yourself does not mean becoming indifferent to other people or abandoning genuine relationships. It means severing the specific dependency where your choices, your ambitions, and your sense of self-worth are held hostage to an audience that was never actually going to be satisfied for long, regardless of how completely you contorted yourself trying to please it. There is a specific test worth applying honestly here, because the approval-seeking self is often so deeply embedded that it becomes difficult to notice its influence directly. Consider a genuine ambition or change you've been quietly considering, and ask yourself honestly how much of your hesitation traces back to imagining specific people's reactions, their surprise, their disapproval, their questions about why you'd want to do something so different from what they've come to expect from you. If this imagined audience is playing a significant role in your hesitation, you have located with real precision exactly where the approval-seeking self is currently exercising its influence. This is not evidence that you should ignore all outside perspective. Genuine counsel from people who know you well remains valuable. It is evidence that a specific, unexamined dependency has been quietly making decisions on your behalf, and that dependency is precisely what this first death is asking you to release. Principle 2. Let go of the story you've been telling about yourself. The second death required for genuine reinvention involves something more subtle than external approval. The internal narrative you've constructed about who you are, what you're capable of, and what your life is supposed to look like. Epictetus taught the concept of prohairesis, the moral will, the faculty of choice that remains in his framework, entirely unbound by past circumstance or prior decision. This is a radical claim, worth sitting with directly. Most people treat their past choices, failures, and patterns as though they constitute a fixed sentence about who they are and what they're capable of becoming. I've always been this way. I'm not the kind of person who does that. This is simply how I am. The Stoics would tell you that every one of these statements, however true they might feel, is actually a story you are choosing, in this present moment, to keep telling rather than an unchangeable fact about your fundamental nature. Seneca wrote to Lucilius about the genuine possibility of transformation at any point in life, regardless of how entrenched a particular pattern or identity might currently feel. He did not consider this transformation easy, and neither should you. Genuine reinvention requires real, sustained effort, not simply a change of mind. But he was explicit that the belief in a fixed, unchangeable self is itself one of the primary obstacles preventing that transformation from ever actually occurring. Letting go of the old story about yourself does not mean pretending your past didn't happen. It means refusing to let that past dictate, by default, what remains possible for you now in this present moment, which is the only moment where genuine choice has ever actually existed. Principle 3. Use adversity as the chisel, not the obstacle. Marcus Aurelius wrote one of the most quietly radical lines in the entire Stoic tradition. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Applied specifically to reinvention, this principle asks you to relate to the difficulties you're currently facing, not as forces preventing the person you're trying to become, but as the actual material that person is being carved from. Consider the specific image of a sculptor working stone. Nothing is added to the marble to reveal the intended form. Material is removed, cut away, chipped off through repeated, deliberate application of pressure against resistance. The Stoics understood adversity in almost exactly this way, not as an unfortunate interruption to the process of becoming who you're meant to be, but as the actual mechanism by which unnecessary, unwanted material gets removed, revealing something closer to your genuine potential underneath. This reframing changes the entire relationship you have with the difficulty currently standing between you and the reinvention you're pursuing. If you view a setback, a failure, or a genuine hardship purely as an obstacle to be endured until it passes, you experience it as a delay, and delay produces frustration and exhaustion over time. If instead you view that same difficulty as the chisel actively shaping the person you're trying to become, engagement replaces mere endurance. Seneca wrote that adversity is precisely the material virtue requires to become visible, since courage without genuine difficulty to face remains simply a theoretical claim rather than a demonstrated reality. The old version of you cannot be removed painlessly. The Stoics never promised that it could. What they offered instead is a way of relating to that necessary difficulty that makes it purposeful rather than simply endured. There is a particular kind of adversity worth naming directly here, because it applies with unusual precision to the specific work of reinvention. The discomfort of being genuinely bad at something new, of feeling like a beginner again after years of competence in an old identity, is itself a form of chiseling most people instinctively avoid rather than embrace. Marcus Aurelius, even as emperor, continued studying philosophy under teachers well into adulthood, willingly occupying the uncomfortable position of student rather than resting entirely on the authority his position could easily have granted him. This willingness to remain a beginner, specifically in service of the person he was still becoming, is itself an example of using adversity as a chisel rather than avoiding it as an obstacle. The discomfort of early incompetence in a new pursuit is not a sign that reinvention is failing. It is frequently the exact sensation of old material being removed to make room for something new. Principle 4. Practice small deaths daily. The Stoics practiced memento mori, the remembrance of death, not simply as contemplation of eventual physical mortality, but as a broader discipline of consciously letting go of whatever version of yourself a given moment requires you to release. Marcus Aurelius wrote about approaching each day as though it could be entirely complete in itself, holding nothing back, clinging to nothing that the day required him to release. Applied to reinvention specifically, this becomes a daily practice rather than a single, dramatic, one-time transformation. Each day offers small opportunities to let a piece of the old self go, the habitual response you've decided no longer serves you, the old grievance you've been carrying, the comfortable but limiting routine that has quietly become an identity rather than simply a habit. Practicing these small deaths consistently rather than waiting for a single dramatic moment of total transformation is how the Stoics actually approached the discipline of reinvention in practice. This matters because most attempts at reinvention fail specifically because they are conceived as a single dramatic event, a New Year's resolution, a dramatic proclamation of change, rather than as an ongoing practice of daily small releases. Seneca compared the cultivation of virtuous character to physical training, noting that transformation comes through repeated, consistent practice rather than through the intensity of any single decision. The old version of you was not built in a single day, through a single choice. It was built through thousands of small, repeated choices, compounding over years. It will not be dismantled any differently. The daily practice of small, deliberate releases is not a lesser version of dramatic reinvention. It is the only version that actually, reliably works. Principle 5. Burn what no longer serves the person you're becoming. Specific Stoic discipline worth naming directly because it requires genuine courage that the previous 4 principles, while difficult, do not quite demand in the same way. The deliberate, active removal of relationships, habits, and commitments that actively anchor you to the old version of yourself you're trying to release. Seneca wrote extensively about being selective, deliberately and without excessive sentimentality, about who and what you allow to occupy your finite time and attention. He warned specifically against people who consistently reinforce your old patterns, who resist and even actively undermine your genuine growth, however unintentionally, simply because your transformation threatens the comfortable, familiar version of the relationship they had grown accustomed to. This is among the most difficult applications of Stoic reinvention because it often requires releasing things that are not inherently bad, but that were specifically suited to a version of you that no longer exists, or that you are actively trying to stop being. It does not ask you to become cold or to abandon genuine, valuable relationships and commitments. It asks for genuine honesty about which specific attachments are actively anchoring you to old patterns you've decided to release, versus which ones are simply part of a full, well-lived life, regardless of which version of yourself is currently developing. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the discipline of examining your associations honestly, recognizing that character is shaped significantly by what you consistently expose yourself to. The old version of you often has accomplices, sometimes entirely unintentional ones, and genuine reinvention frequently requires the courage to honestly identify and, where necessary, release them. Principle 6. What remains when the old self is gone? We've arrived at the final principle, the one I promised at the beginning would address what most people never think to ask. What actually remains once the old version of yourself has genuinely been released? This question matters because it addresses a fear that quietly prevents many people from ever undertaking genuine reinvention in the first place. The fear that beneath the old identity, the old patterns, the old story, there might be nothing at all or nothing worth discovering. The Stoics offer a direct, tested answer to this fear. Epictetus taught that beneath every external role, every habitual pattern, every story you've told about yourself, there remains something the Stoics considered genuinely unshakable: your capacity for reason, your faculty of choice, your fundamental character, which cannot actually be destroyed by any external circumstance, and which was never actually identical to any of the versions of yourself you've been deliberately releasing throughout this entire process. Marcus Aurelius called this the inner citadel, a stable core of character and judgment that remains constant even as everything built around it changes, sometimes dramatically, across the different chapters of a life. This is the actual answer to what remains when the old self is destroyed. Not nothing, not emptiness. The same underlying capacity for wisdom, integrity, and reason that was present all along, simply obscured by layers of habit, external approval seeking, and inherited story that had accumulated over years without ever being genuinely examined. Destroying the old version of yourself does not eliminate this core. It reveals it more clearly, the way removing unnecessary material from stone reveals the form that was always somehow present within it, waiting for the excess to be carved away. Bringing it all together. Let's step back and look at what we've actually built today. 6 principles. Recognizing that you are already changing constantly, whether directed or not. Killing the version of yourself that needs approval. Releasing the fixed story you've been telling about who you are, using adversity as the chisel rather than merely the obstacle. practicing small deaths daily rather than waiting for one dramatic transformation, and honestly releasing what actively anchors you to patterns you've decided to leave behind, that together explain how the Stoics approached the genuine, difficult work of reinvention and what actually remains once that work has been done honestly. This is the deeper truth behind the title of this video. Life will eventually dismantle the version of you that exists today, whether through gradual change or sudden crisis, whether you participate in that process consciously or not. The only genuine choice available to you is whether this transformation happens with intention, guided by values you've actually examined, or whether it happens entirely by default, shaped by whatever pressures and circumstances happen to apply themselves without your active participation. The Stoics spent their entire tradition arguing for the first option, not because it is easier, it is almost never easier, but because it is the only version of transformation that actually produces a self worth becoming, rather than simply a self that circumstance happened to leave behind. It's worth being honest about something before we close. Every one of these 6 principles asks something genuinely uncomfortable of you, and none of them offer a version of reinvention that arrives without real difficulty. This is not a video promising an easy transformation, because the Stoics themselves never believed one existed. What they offered instead, and what these 6 principles offer specifically, is the assurance that the difficulty involved in genuine reinvention is not wasted, meaningless suffering. It is the actual, necessary process by which an old, limited version of yourself gets released, and something closer to your genuine capacity gets revealed underneath it. Marcus Aurelius did not consider this an easy trade. He considered it the only trade actually available to anyone serious about becoming who they were genuinely capable of being, rather than remaining permanently whoever circumstance and habit had accidentally assembled by default. Here is your challenge for tonight, not 6 challenges, just one. Look honestly at the 6 principles we've covered and identify the specific version of yourself, the specific pattern, story, or attachment that you already know needs to be released, whether or not you've been willing to admit this until now. Spend real time tonight considering what beginning that release would actually look like tomorrow, not as a dramatic one-time event, but as the first of many small, deliberate deaths that genuine reinvention actually requires. Marcus Aurelius did not become the philosopher we still study 2,000 years later through a single transformative moment. He became that person through the accumulated weight of thousands of ordinary days, each one containing small, deliberate releases of whatever no longer served the character he was actively trying to build. That same practice, built one honest release at a time, is available to you starting today. If this video gave you something, a shift, a reframe, a moment of genuine recognition, hit the like button. It costs nothing, and it tells us this kind of depth is exactly what you want more of. Leave a comment and tell me honestly, which version of yourself do you think you most need to release before life eventually does it for you? I read every comment on this channel, and I'll be down there with you. Subscribe to Accent Stoic if you haven't already. We go this deep every single week into philosophy that has survived 2,000 years because it was built for exactly the hardest, most ordinary moments of a real life. Until next time, stay grounded, stay disciplined, and remember what Marcus Aurelius told himself on the mornings the world felt heaviest. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength.